Deeper than music. The core of you, the fans, the truth is deeper than music. Deeper than music. Simply the truth is the latest, the newest. It's deeper than music. Deeper than music. The core of you, the fans, the truth is deeper than music. Deeper than music. Simply the truth is the latest, the newest. It's deeper than music. Deeper than music.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Deeper Than Music Radio. Behind every great song, there's an even greater story. Today we have a very special guest. I would say, legendary status. With this guy, Scott Page, names come to mind. I'm talking about Supertramp, Toto, Pink Floyd, just to name a few, and also not only on the music side, but also on the business side. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome to Deeper the Music Radio, Scott Page. Scott, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Marcus. Hey, thank you for having me on your show. It's great.
Oh,
Thanks for the great
not a
intro.
problem. Not hey, your history and what you've done in music, man. I could go on and on. Man, and for me, I was born in the late '70s, so Pink Floyd, especially Toto. I just remember classics. As far as these are classic bands. And your story is just phenomenal because not only did you do music, you also are an entrepreneur and a philanthropist. And then your father. So you come from a music family, correct?
Yep, that's true. Yeah, I grew up on a television show called The Lawrence Welk Show when I was a kid. My dad was on that show for 14 years back in the early days. And so I was around television. He was a multi-instrumentalist. He played everything from oboe, English horn, clarinet, saxophone, flute, all the woodwinds on those shows. And so I'd been around that all my life. And that was on the music side. And then my dad was also a serial entrepreneur. We had everything from boat businesses to donut businesses to candy businesses to lighting businesses to reed businesses. And my dad was also very instrumental as one of the kind of inventors of the famous guitar pedal called the wah-wah pedal, right? Which has been, one of those historic things. Yeah. So, I've been around the music business and around technology. And so I think a big part of what I've done is, kind of mix two of them both together. So I love the concept of business and entrepreneurship. And I also love the idea of art and making things and being a musician. So I've been able to combine that. And it's been a very interesting ride. Been very thankful, very, very thankful.
Yeah, because you have a long career. You're still doing what you do. And also, like you said, the business side, so you were able to, expand beyond that. And just merge your talents, like you said, with technology and music. So what I researched was, so your first experience of public or being in the public eye was you performed the trumpet with your father on the Christmas special of the Lawrence Welk Show?
Oh, yeah, I used to do those. Yeah, every year they would have a Christmas show where all the families would come on. And so I my first instrument, I was a trumpet player. I'm mostly known as a saxophone guitarist, but I played trumpet when I was a kid. And I remember fond memories of going on that show. I mean, it was such a big deal. I'd learn a song. We did Outer Space Santa. And actually, one time I was on the show, my father and myself, we both water skied because we were real big in sports in those days. We water skied and he played two clarinets and I played a trumpet. And we played By the Sea, By the Sea. So this was on the Lawrence Welk Show. So, yeah, I've done that. And I guess one of my biggest claim to fame and my historic thing is I'm the only guy that's ever played in Pink Floyd and Lawrence Welk. So there you go.
Wow.
That's a unique
two legendary. So a question that I had, coming from a family of musicians, or your father, did you know early on that you wanted to be a musician, or was it kind of like, this is the family thing, this is what I'm going to do?
No, not at all. Actually, I got a little bit interested when I was playing trumpet when I was about 6 or 7. I was playing, and my dad, I only kind of played more for my dad, but I was really more interested in drafting, and drawing and that kind of stuff. And so I studied to be a draftsman. And through the years, when I was going up through junior high school and high school, I was taking drafting classes and studying. I wanted to be an architect. That was my
Okay.
goal in life, to be an architect. But my dad always said to me, well, just keep playing your horn. It's something you can do on the weekends, instead of working, let's say, at a gas station or someplace, you can go play a couple gigs and it'll just be fun and it's good for you. So I kind of kept it up, but I was not interested at all. And then I ended up meeting a guy by the name of Frank Zaba, who was a monster trumpet player. And he was in a band got me in this band with Jeff Beccaro and David Page, who were later became, we were a kid band, but those are the two guys that founded Toto later on. So our kid band was called Merciful Soul Band. And I got in the band, and it was like a blood, sweat, and tears Chicago style band. And I was the worst guy in the band. I played second trumpet, but I saw the light. We were winning all the battle of the bands because the band was incredible. I just happened to be the worst guy in the band, but I could get by, learn enough to play the second trumpet parts. And but I got the music fever because a couple things. At that time I started working at a place called Audiodyne, and I was doing drafting where I was drawing these exploded views of these parts. So if you imagine a part carved, and we had no computers in those days, we had to use a pencil and a paper and kind of extra all that. So I was doing that, drinking coffee all day, drawing away. And then I got this band, and all of a sudden I realized, wait a minute, there's a lot of girls over here. It was a total different scene going over playing the music business. So I got the music bug. And then from that point on, I was just a fanatic, studied with mostly just a lot of different teachers through the years, and mostly all one-on-one lessons, and just learned by studying and playing gigs, and just kind of went for it in that way. And during when I couldn't play good enough in the early days, I used my drafting skills. I was to become a music copyist.
Okay.
And so because I had good skills of using a pen and a pencil and stuff, it was easy for me to jump in and be a music copyist. And that was fun. That was interesting because it would be like I was working for like different composers. One guy, H.B. Barnum, and he would call me up at 2:00 in the morning, said, okay, I got charts ready. I'd drive over to his place. He'd hand me a bundle of scores, and I'd come home, get the coffee going, and stay up all night long and write out the first trumpet part, the second trumpet part, all by hand, right on paper. And then I'd be delirious, and I'd get the session was at 9 a.m. and I'd have to show up at the session and drop off the charts. And if there were mistakes, I'd get pummeled because it costs money to fix mistakes. You got a full orchestra sitting there, and all of a sudden, hey, that's a flat, not a sharp. I forgot to put that in because we were doing it by hand. So that was the kind of stuff I was doing back in the day, and that kept me alive and kept me in the music business. And then it was just playing every gig I could possibly play.
So when you did that, because I also know that you did some acting too, as far as like one of my favorite books as a kid, The Hardy Boys. You were in The Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew Mysteries, and also The Young and the Restless. So as you were honing your music skills, were you also doing the acting as well in tandem, or was that like later?
No, I was always a musician. It's funny. You've done your homework. That's funny. It was mostly all these parts that I'd ever done was never in acting. I was more called as a musician to be a musician as an actor. So so when we did Hardy Boys and stuff, the scene had to do with a band and stuff in that. So I was part of that. And then when I did Young and the Restless, I did that for over about a year and a half. And I was part of a band. There was a guy by the name of, he was Danny Romalotti was his name in the show. And it was Michael Damian, who was the star. He did Broadway and a bunch of stuff, but he was on that show. And his character was a rock and roll star.
Okay.
And so as him, the rock and roll star, he had to have his rock and roll band. And so I was one of the players in that band. It was funny. I was on that show with Lawrence Juber, who was in Paul McCartney's band Wings.
Oh, wow.
And we did that together. And it was at that time, it was one of the, I still look at this as one of the greatest gigs I've ever had, because it was one of those things you could go in on a Friday, and we'd get there at 6 a.m. and we'd go till noon, and we'd cut 4 shows because they cut the segments we would do. Boom, boom, boom. Get paid for 4 shows, and I would have to work for the month. It was great. It was one of those that just kind of paid the bills so nicely. You had that one gig, and allowed me then to study, practice, and do whatever I had to do, and the rest was gravy. Back in those days.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, in those days, we'd be playing, 5, 6, 7 nights a week. because there were club gigs
Wow.
kind of everywhere to go play, and you could actually make a living in those days. It's really sort of sad that you see today is back in those days we could make, you'd get $100 for a gig or something, maybe, $50 to $100, and today you get $50 to $100 to play a club. There's been no gain in 30
no
years.
game.
No
And then
gain in
now,
30, 40 years, right? It's been so
and
sad
now
for the musician. Mhm.
Yeah, and now like with technology, like the stuff that you did by hand, you can, it's computer, it's
Oh yeah.
heavily automated,
Oh
and
yeah.
then now like streaming, right? And kind
Yep.
of, it's funny how technology has changed since then. So, could you walk us through how you got with involved with Supertramp?
With Supertramp, sure. That's interesting. Again, I'm one of those guys that would take every gig, play everywhere I can, as much as I could. And I had a gig that I used to play at this place called Jason's in Burbank, and this is in California. And we played a little gig there, and I used to play. It was Sundays and Monday nights. We had this kind of ongoing residence. I did it every Sunday and Monday for years. And there was a guy that was sitting over would sit at the bar all the time and have a beer. And he was always at the show, and I talked to him every once in a while. I never really knew much about him. He just always sit there. He was very quiet. And then I asked him one day, I said, well, what do you do? And he says, well, I'm a drummer. I said, well, what do you do? He says, I play in a band called Supertramp, and we're in the studio now recording this record, which was, I think, Breakfast in America, which was the big record at the time. And I think it was, and so so I became friends and stuff. And then years later, I got a call because he remembered me from playing that gig. I was out playing with Diana Ross at the time, and we were in Vegas. And I got a call from Bob, and he said, "Oh, hey, we're looking for somebody. Would you be interested?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "I'm in Vegas." I said, "But on Wednesday I could come in." And he says, "Why don't you come in and audition?" So I flew in from Vegas and went to Rick Davies' house, who lived in Woodland Hills at the time, and auditioned and played, and I got the gig. And that was that. That's how that started. From that point on, I did that for quite a few years.
Yeah, because you became a supporting part of the band, which is phenomenal. And then from there, I guess that's how you got involved with Toto.
No, I actually got involved with Pink Floyd from that point.
Oh, okay.
Because I'd been playing
Wow.
Supertramp for a while, and what had happened is I got called to play on Dave Gilmour came to play on the Supertramp record. He was guesting on the record.
Yeah.
Guitar player from Pink Floyd. And so he came and we talked, and that night I had a gig just down the street where I had a band called the Hang Dynasty, which was made up of a whole bunch of great players. Jeff Baxter from the Doobie Brothers and Michael
Wow.
Finnegan, and all these incredible players. And we'd play in this club. And so I invited Gilmour down, Dave, to hang out. He came down and hung out, and we became friends. And I had another thing that I was doing a week later that I invited him to called The First Dance. It was a big show that I was putting on inside of Guitar Center that I was filming. And this has a whole deal with this process I created called visual sound with these zooming mics and everything. I've been a technologist, kind of trying to put sound and picture together for years and have done weird kind of events, and that's another whole story. But anyway, I invited him to that, and it just happened to be that Jeff Porcaro was playing on the Pink Floyd record, and he was in the studio. Well, Jeff was going to do my gig at Guitar Center that next weekend, and this is the thing. I had the Toto guys, I had people from Supertramp, I had the Tower of Power horns, and big giant choir, and there's 30,
Wow.
40, 50 people on the stage, and we did this giant event at the show. And so Gilmour came to that. Well, what happened was Jeff Porcaro was playing, I'm trying to remember exactly, was playing on the record, and he said, "Hey, I got to leave because I'm doing this thing with Scott Page." And so he came with Gilmour, I guess came with him, and Jeff came to the thing, and that's how I met Gilmour. And then next couple of days, I got a call back. He called me on the phone, said, "Hey, we're doing this record. Would you come play on the record?" I went and played on the record. From there, then I got a call after the record, and next thing I know, I'm playing with Pink Floyd. And
Wow.
I went from one to the next.
And so like when I think of bands and I think of that era, like just recently I watched Almost Famous. And I would always watch Behind the Music. I used to love that show. Hence, that was the motivation, inspiration for Deep in the Music. I wanted to stop and ask, what has been, because you've done so much, what has been in your career, what has been your most rewarding moment?
Oh gosh. Well, first of all, there's only one moment, and it's always the same moment. Think about that. The moments
Okay.
there can't be two moments, right? But I know
Yeah.
what you mean. I know what you mean. Gosh, I don't I don't really. I mean, I can tell you some moments that I think I don't know when I would say rewarding. I guess they were rewarding because they're so embedded in my brain. I guess they're moments you just remember. Okay, I can say it depends on what type of moment. But if we're talking about musical moments, I can say that a couple things that I've done that I'll never forget that were just extraordinary was we with Pink Floyd we played Venice, Italy, where we were out on a the band floated down these two barges, each one that were the size of a football field. It took 5 days, or it took 2 weeks to float these barges down. They set them up in front, anchored them up in front of St. Mark's Square in Venice, Italy, and set up the entire show. All the trucks were on, a bunch of trucks were on there with gear. I mean, it was a massive tent. And people were coming in from all over. It was going to be a free concert, free Pink Floyd concert in Venice. Well, needless to say, hundreds of thousands of people showed up. And
Wow.
it was incredible in the sense they had shut down Venice. There were so many people that showed up, and people were living on gondolas and everything to trying to get a space waiting for the show to happen. So it just filled up, and it was just chaos like you can't even believe. But it was the most amazing thing. And it poured rain the night before, and the show was on, it was off, it was on, and Floyd, they completely lit the entire city as far as you could see down the canal on both sides, in front of St. Mark's Square, hundreds of thousands of people, this whole thing. And and then they shot off about $500,000 with the fireworks right afterwards, this big giant show. And
Wow.
it was crazy. It was like one of the most amazing events of all time. So that one from a musical moment was extraordinary because there'll never be another concert like this. The place, what was crazy is the next day I went over, I stayed up basically for about 5 days videoing the entire thing. I was a video fanatic while I was on the tour. I shot about 150 hours, 130 hours, I guess, of Floyd on that tour. And
Hmm.
this was one I really went solid. So I went over that night after the show and went on the other side off the barge on the street. And people were sleeping on the streets. It was like crazy. And there was so much garbage. It was like a mess. And it was just totally destroyed. And I heard that the whole city council got fired, everybody for even having it, because they were even freaking
Wow.
because we had those, big giant subwoofers, bass drums going bam,
Yeah.
bam, and those big old buildings in Venice. Everybody was freaking out. So it was an extraordinary moment. That was one. We did the Palace of Versailles, which was another crazy thing. 90,000 people outside. First time a band ever played there. That was an extraordinary show. We did Supertramp. We did Parc du Sceau, which was this crazy, crazy place in France, and that was 100,000 plus people out. So there's been a handful of these crazy shows I've done through the years, and
Wow.
obviously tons of memorable musical moments playing with incredible people and heroes through the years. So that's a really tough question. It's like it really depends on what
So
you want to focus on, right?
yeah, so with the and I like with you and all of you done, I could imagine like you describe moments which is perfect because it's not just one thing; it's like a plethora of things that you did. And you also mentioned that you performed with some of your heroes. At any time during your career meeting these people, did you ever get starstruck at any
uh,
moment?
yeah, which one was this is really interesting to me because I had played with a lot of different celebrities through the years, and you get a different. You start to see these as just regular people, right?
Yeah.
For the most part, so you don't get so much that too much. But I'll never forget, I got called to play with Diana Ross,
Mm.
and I went and played with. I flew to New York. And it was for a 6-week tour. I thought, oh, okay. I just finished that show I told you about. I did with Gilmore and stuff, right? And no, was that? Yeah, was it that show? I was actually, no, I take it back. It was a different show. But anyway, um, so I fly to New York, and she walked in the room, and her presence was so big and so powerful. I'd never seen anything like it. It just blew my mind. She was just incredible, the way she moved, the way she talked. And for some reason, they were all starstruck. And that just struck me so strange. And I could not figure it out. So I ended up, she has been probably, actually, I had learned more. I have to say that Diana Ross is probably one of the most influential people I've ever met in my life. I learned so much from her about presence, how to be present, how to entertain, just this whole, how to communicate and connect with an audience like nobody I've ever learned from before. She was extraordinary. I'll never forget, because I couldn't take my eyes off her, and I just couldn't understand why. There was just something about her that made her so unique. And I remember the first nights on the gig, I was in a horn section for this particular job, and I had a book, so I had to read the charts. And I made so many mistakes because I couldn't take my eyes off of her, right? And I couldn't figure it out. So I went back and I spent 2 days studying the book, memorized the book, so I wouldn't have to read. I could just play the parts. And I just started watching her, and then I just started realizing, I started seeing things night after night, and started analyzing the kind of patterns, the way she moved, what she did, what she said, and I started seeing these patterns. I love patterns. I mean, that's, for me, is a big learning tool, because once you start to identify patterns, you can start to put pieces together in a way and start to analyze how things work. So she just basically blew my mind, because she could get up there and she would get an entire audience every single night standing on their feet, just screaming like crazy. And she would do a few things. One that I loved the most was how she would find somebody in the front row, right? And she'd basically communicate with them, and because she could see them, and they'd look in each other's eyes, and she'd let them know that was them. She saw them. She really put her efforts out there to look at that person and have a little experience with them, right? Not just looking at a big blank wall, which is easy when you're on those big stages, right? It looks like a giant piece of wallpaper. It's like, playing those big shows, everybody thinks, oh, that's the most exciting thing. Well, it is when you do it for a little bit, but after a while, it's like you feel like you're just playing to a wall, right? It's not the same as like when you're jammed in a small club and people are all wrapped around you and you're feeling everybody's energy, right? It's like a different kind of a thing. Right.
So it's not as intimate, and you just say Diana Ross had that. She can engage the crowd and make them feel like, hey, this is intimate. This is an intimate experience. Wow,
incredibly. And so she would take somebody in the front row and find them and make them know, and then the people around them would feel it, right? And then she'd find somebody over here on the right, and then the left, and then she'd find somebody in the back of the stage that might be holding a sign, waving, hi, Diana, I love you, Diana. And then she's, I love you too. Thank you. It really communicates with the people and recognizes everybody. And by that end of the show, the entire thing was on fire. It was just like crazy. She just lift people up. And the other thing is the way she stood. She knew how to stand. She was a good dancer, but that wasn't her thing. It wasn't like J-Lo or somebody else at like shows that are like real dance heavy. She could dance, but that wasn't her thing, right, at all. Her main thing was just the way she posed, the way she stood, how she moved. And I learned from her from that, the way she angled her body and the things just by the way she stood was so appealing that you just had to look, right? Mm-hmm. So I started applying a lot of these things. And I remember going out the next day after a couple shows, and I realized this thing of the way she stood. I went, oh, that's great. She always looks really posed right. Her shoulders are angled. She just had a whole beautiful posture about the way she held herself when she stood up on stage. I went out the next day and I bought I went to the guitar store and I found a stretch guitar strap, and I made that got a hook and thing, and made my sax strap so I could put it around my body because when you have your saxophone, you have a neck strap, you're stuck. The saxophone is always at the certain place, right? You can't put it down to the side unless you take it off the hook. So I said, I'm going to put on a stretch strap so I can take it. I could just stretch it down, right? I could just push it down because I wanted to stand a specific way to, And I remember doing weird stuff like standing in front of mirrors in my room with my guitar and my saxophone, or with my saxophone at that time, and trying to figure out how I would look when I stood there with that dang saxophone in my hand. So she was really instrumental in making me think about that, you know, those finer details of presence in show business, and, you know, communicating and really realizing that it's not what you play, it's what you say. It's just this thing, you know. It's her. And David Gilmour he made me made me realize that the key is the melody. He's the master of melody. There's nobody. I mean, his melodies are just monumental, and he made me realize, stop playing so many notes. Play ones that people can understand and follow, and play a melody. You know, when you hear something, try to construct a melody over the chord changes that somebody can relate to. And, you know, when you're a young saxophone player, you're playing all this crazy stuff instead of just just laying down a melody or something that somebody can really feel and get understanding. So, you know, all these different artists, I'm Gilmour. I love him. I'm starstruck. He's my mentor. You know, I am starstruck at the fact that he's just has a sensibility about melody and tone and these little fine details, the way he hits the notes and things. And it's incredible, right? And what's so great about when you find these masters, the deeper you go, you start seeing more of those, what it really takes to be that, right? To understand, you know, some people have it. I've been one of those people that really had to learn it. You know, I know people that really have it. Me, I had to learn it. So anybody can do it. If I could do it, anybody could do it.
Yeah, because it's fascinating how you said, like, the first, you know, when you were in Supertramp, you're like, but I wasn't the greatest of the players. But then I imagine that you fine-tuned and learned your craft because to be able to work with, you know, other legendary bands, to go on tour with, you know, Diana Ross and such. I mean, it's amazing. On the flip side,
actually, when I was playing a little better by the time I was with Supertramp, what I was talking about was early days when it was Merciful Soul, when I was just out of high school, going into college and switching to saxophone. And, you know, I was kind of a B-flat trumpet player, not that great. And, but I studied and I was really trying to get better. But that's where I got hooked. But it was later. By the time I got to Supertramp, I was playing better. I doubled. My dad was a doubler, you know, playing oboe, English horn, flute, all these things. And he always said, you know, if you can make yourself more valuable for work, you'll get the jobs. And, you know, so I doubled. So I played, you know, saxophone and guitar. I figured those were two really good doubles because, you know, there's a lot of rhythm parts to play. And then a lot of the bands need saxophones only on certain songs. So instead of them getting a saxophone player and a guitar player, they get a guitar player and I can play the saxophone parts, or played a little bit of keyboard and I sang a little bit and I played utility a lot. That was a part that that was my niche that I tried to hone and specialize in. And you know, for me, I spent most of my time really trying to wear my own clothes. And what I mean by that is, you know, when everybody's going left, I'm going right. And trying to figure out how you sound different, because, you know, the most important thing is, you know, when I realized that those guys that could kill you with one note, you know, BB King can play one note, you know, it's BB King. You know, David Sanborn was one of the greatest, you know, saxophone players to come along in the later years, that basically revolutionized the thing because he had a unique sound. So that was the whole deal, is trying to find a unique niche and sound for me that would make me stand out and be unique. And I realized, I was talking about David Sanborn. A friend of mine sent me one of my music mentors that I, you know, practiced with and studied. We listened to records and, you know, hung out in music, went to see bands. And one of those, my best friend at the time, called me up and said, "Oh, dude, you got to hear this record." And I said, "What is it?" And he says, "It's called First Flight. It's a saxophone player called David Sanborn. You got to hear this guy." So I went to Tower Records that night because it was open 24 hours.
Yeah.
And I bought the album and brought it back home, threw that thing on, and my mouth dropped to the floor. And I was an alto player at that time. And I said, I'm never playing alto again. Because I knew that every saxophone player on the planet was going to try to play like Sanborn.
Yeah.
Because he had the most incredible sound, tone, time, lines, everything about him was just unique. He just sounded like the new thing, right?
Hmm.
So I knew at that point, wait a minute, I'm going to go try to chase this market. And said, no, it's crazy. So I started really thinking, and I realized that. Started analyzing. I said, oh, saxophone players. Let me think about this. Jazz guys. I could go Fathead, Newman, Lockjaw Davis, Ben Webster, Ike Quebec, Charlie Parker, on and on and on. Sonny Stitt. I could name zillions of saxophone players, right? That played jazz. And then I said, okay, how about rock saxophone players? And I went, okay, rock and roll. I went, okay, Junior Walker, King Curtis, and I started stumbling, right? And I was like, oh my God, there's only a handful. Bobby Keys, Clarence Clemens, and then I thought, okay, well, it's a business, because I try to, I'm an artist, but I always think business. I love both of them. They work hand in hand the way I think. And so from a business point of view, I realized that made sense, was to go after a market. So while everybody else was going, I was going and just playing as dumb as I could, and tried to learn and study rock and roll, right? And figured that out and found a niche, because that was where there was, that was where the work was. And so that's kind of my story, how I got into that. And I started studying that stuff, and there you go. Next thing you know, I'm working.
So you also brought up another thing, because when I think of like multi-instrumentalists, like they said Prince knew 99 instruments. Was it hard? Is it hard to go from another instrument to another instrument? I've always wondered that. Like people that can play multiple instruments, is it a hard task to learn, or is it just natural?
Well, once you get the understanding of music, and you get your ears trained, and you start hearing where things are going, and you get the notes, the music in you, you can start pecking things out on other instruments, because you know what you're going for. And then so you start learning the fingerings, or in guitars, you're learning the strings, the chords and things, but all that transfers over to other instruments. So it does make it easier by far. I mean, if you're a proficient on any instrument, moving to any other instrument, it helps you big time, because the hard part is training your ears and all of that. The other stuff becomes more mechanical, or there is what I like about the saxophone is it's like singing. It's a very expressive instrument. You can add your own color to it and open up your throat, and it sounds or you can tighten your tongue up and give it a he. You can really make it express and play it in different ways, and play fast, play slow, play low, play high. It's one of those kind of instruments that takes some time to get figured out. If you're coming from a guitar or something, I mean, that's where the hard part comes, is that expressiveness. You get the finger, you can kind of make some noise, but then it's difficult to make it really where it becomes you kind of merge with the instrument in a sense. It becomes so much part of you that you can bend it and tweak it and do things with it that are more from an emotional soul, from a conscious space, right? A different place where it runs. So that's the thing. But yeah, it definitely helps a lot. And it depends again what instrument you play. It's easier to go from if I'm going to go from saxophone to flute, or flute to clarinet, or because those instruments finger a lot the same. And they're still woodwind instruments. So those types of instruments, going from tenor saxophone to becoming a tuba player, that's another game. That's a different ball game, because that's another whole thing. That's the facility to be able to make the thing make even any noise. And then you got air and breathing and everything. But all the music will help you, because you can look at the music, read a note, A, B, C, D, F, G. You know that? Okay, great. You just got to figure out where A, B, C, D, F, G is on the other instrument, right?
Instrument. So from Pink Floyd, then you got involved with Toto. How did that?
No, that's not true. I was actually Toto was earlier.
I'm sorry.
Earlier, yeah.
Toto was earlier, and then and then you got involved with Pink Floyd.
Yeah, I mean, it started out the top level is it was in the 70s. I started out early 70s with a band called Max, and we were touring and playing. I was an original band living up in Haight-Ashbury areas up in San Francisco, and we were playing all the San Francisco scene. and we toured with a band called Malo, which was George Santana, Santana's brother.
Wow.
And we played. They had one hit called Suavecito. So we were out with that, and then from there I went to a band called, and I played gigs and stuff around town, and we're doing that. And then I got into Seals and Crofts. I don't know if you remember that band. They did Summer Breeze, and they had a couple major hits. They were a huge band at the time, very big pop success. Really admired by the musician community, wonderful players on it. It's funny because Jeff Porcaro and Page and all those guys worked when the Toto guys became big session guys. On top of their Toto, they did, thousands of albums. They were on everybody's records. Probably one of the most recorded group of musicians in the world ever. Those guys, they've been on so many records, everything from Michael Jackson's, Beatles, all that stuff. They're legendary in that sense. From that, so I went to Seals and Croft, and then Seals and Croft, during that period of time, I played with David Soul. Remember David Soul? He was Starsky and Hutch. That show, Starsky and Hutch, and he had a few big hits, and we toured, and I was his music director for a while, and then I did. I was in the house band at Magic Mountain. That was back in the early days. Then I was also in the house band in Disneyland, and I played all those Chuck Berry shows. Used to play with all those 50s artists, the Platters, the Drifters, all of them. I mean, it's so funny. I played with them all. I played with James Brown. I played with a bunch of different guys for the years. So I can actually say all those moments were great, right? Obviously playing with James Brown was a thrill, and Chuck Berry was a thrill. So from there I went to, then that was a variety of other things happened in between. Then Supertramp was the next band. It's sort of that 1980 to 83, and then 85 time frame. I ended up switching over to Toto, and then from Toto, I was doing Toto, and then Supertramp, Toto again. Then Floyd came up. That's right, Floyd. Gosh, I can't remember. And then from Floyd, then I just I got into business. I studied business when I was out with Floyd. Mm-hmm. And from there, that was my whole thing. I spent 2 years on the road studying. Then I started a business with a guy named Bob Ezrin, who produced Floyd. And we took that company public. It was called Seventh Level. And we did kind of one of my all-time favorite things. My claim to fame that I'm probably most proud of is I directed, co-produced, and directed the world's first interactive cartoon called Toonland.
Wow.
And that starred Howie Mandel. And that was on all the Windows machines back in the day. And that's when I got into tech. I left Floyd, and then I became a tech guy, and since then been a serial sort of entrepreneur and playing. And now I've got my new company, Think Experience, which is my fourth startup, and I'm doing we're doing our first Think Experience, which is a Think Floyd experience, which makes sense. And we've been doing it in a immersive 360-degree dome in downtown Los Angeles. And we've done 32, pretty much close to sold out all the shows, I think. There was a couple, maybe a little weak, but mostly very successful run there. And we're still doing that. And that's an immersive entertainment company. So I'm combining technology and the music, as I figured for this next one I'm going to do is I want to play too. Not just do technology. I've had tech companies and stuff like that before, but this is back into really playing, and I'm playing a lot, and I'm loving it. Playing with a great band. The Think Band is monstrous. It's Stephen Perkins, who founded a little band called Jane's Addiction.
Okay, yeah.
Porno for Pyros. That's Stephen's my partner, and Norwood Fisher, who founded Fishbone, great bass player and monster player, and Kenny Olson, who was started with Kid Rock. They started the band together, Kids Band, and did all those albums, and a bunch of us. And then Roberta Friedman, who was out on Floyd with us, the singer, and this kid Derek Day, who we found, who is just a dynamite. He is one of the most talented people I've met in a long time. He is the fearless. He's the real deal. We haven't seen Perkins and myself. We love him. We call him he's our art bird. And so we've been playing with him, and we've been doing this Floyd show, and it's been a lot of fun. And we're working on some other shows. We're working on a Cirque du Soleil style show right now, adding elements, because the whole model today is you really got to create an experience as an artist.
Yeah,
can't be music. Can't sell music anymore, right? That's gone. That game's over.
Yeah,
and the streaming business is great for some people, but not for most, because a million streams roughly pays around $5,000.
Yeah,
And so, and very few artists even get 1 million streams, right? Like 2%, 2 to 3% of that entire catalog of Spotify hits those numbers. So it's pretty, it's not a lot of people getting those streams, and it's pretty much owned still by all the record labels and everything, because the new the playlists are the new radio stations, right? And those are controlled by the big business and stuff. So it's a different game, but the experiential space is wide open, and that's the place we're playing in right now.
So, Scott, with all your history, and thank you, because you provide us a lot, and with all great shows, we only have a few minutes left. And again, thank you for taking the time to be on Deeper Than Music. So my last question is, with everything you, so many greats, so many different genres of music that you work with. Your career, like I said, is legendary. So with your great catalog and what you brought to music, what you brought to technology, when it's all said, what would you want to be remembered for? Like, what would you want your legacy to speak of?
My favorite subject on the planet is consciousness, right?
Mm-hmm.
The whole idea of inner peace and where are we, who are we, where do we come from in that area. And I think that's the most important journey anybody should do. I mean, it's once you start to realize a couple things. Number one, the only thing that's real is you and me talking right now. Everything else is an illusion, right? 5 minutes ago, we can't change. We can't do anything about. And so realizing that, the present moment is the only thing that's real. And that if I could help anybody realize that is the most important thing you can do. Your job is here to help consciousness unfold. That's your job, period. There's nothing else. You're going to blink, you're going to be 60, you're going to blink, you're going to be on your deathbed. It's like that fast. Boom, boom. Like I just rattled off a career to you over that period of time, and it seems like it just happened yesterday, right? It's like a weird thing. So there's phenomena. So if I could was anything that anybody that I actually was known for the guy that helped some people go, holy cow, man, that guy showed me what was really important. What really matters, right? So, I've always said a thing that I put on that I've written on every time I've ever signed my name or I've done anything. I always write this there, and I don't ever mean this in anything other than I write what a life, and it's been crazy ride, because it's all about the ride. Because the only thing is you and me talking. If I'm feeling good right now, this is real. I'm here, not the stuff that's going on in my head. So all I can say is what a life. It's a great ride. And, if I could help make anybody, and which I'm actually thankful for, there are a few people that have been, that I feel that I've actually given some insights to that have been good. So for me, that's it. That would be the most important thing for me.
And lastly, you spoke about your current company and your project. Mm-hmm. Where else can people catch up with Scott Page, see what he's doing? Shameless promotion time, if you will.
I love that. All right. Thank you very much. Yeah, everything, all my social is IAM Scott Page, IAM SCOTTPAGE on Instagram. And you can find me on Facebook and those places. That's probably the best way. Everything's IAM Scott Page, and look for Think EXP. Think on Instagram, it's think_EXP. And then on, Facebook, Think EXP, you can start looking for that. And start following us and Perkins and all of us. And there you go. Shameless plug. Thank you for that. I appreciate that very much.
No, not a problem, Scott. Thank you for taking the time out of your work schedule to just be on the show and share a rich history. I mean, wow.
I hope I didn't talk too much. I'm known for talking a lot.
No, but I mean, just the people you named, and like I said, like a couple of days ago, I was watching Almost Famous, and I mean, it was just like, wow, it's just like all this stuff is in that era and then some. Just thank you for sharing this rich history and your experience in deeper than the music and stuff like that. So definitely appreciate it. So, ladies and gentlemen, listening, legendary Scott Page, you heard it here on Deeper Than Music. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it, man. That was a blast.